Hello and welcome to the Melodology Podcast, celebrating the unsung excellence of melody makers. My name is Arthur Breur and I am your host. I am a composer and I am also a melody geek. I love melodies. I write music that's very melodic, and I'm really excited to be talking about melodies and looking at them with guest composers. And my guest composer today is Dale Trumbore. Here's a little bit of information from her bio. Dale Trumbore is a Los Angeles-based composer and writer whose music has been called devastatingly beautiful by the Washington Post and praised for its soaring melodies and beguiling harmonies by the New York Times. She has written extensively about working through creative blocks and establishing a career in music. Her first book, Staying Composed: Overcoming Anxiety and Self-Doubt Within a Creative Life, was hailed by writer Angela Miles Beeching as a treasure trove of practical strategies for moving your artistic career forward, not only for composers, but for performers, writers, and other creatives. A New Jersey native, Dale lives in Azusa, California, with her husband, and here's the most important part: their two cats. That is one of the best facts about you, Dale. Dale, welcome to the Melodology Podcast.
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here.
You picked a melody today, and we'll talk about what that melody is in a couple minutes, that you were really excited about and is by a particular composer who I understand is an influence of yours. Tell me about your musical influences.
I grew up listening mostly to musical theater before I ever delved into the world of classical music. My mom is a big fan of musical theater, and she would play Barbara Cook in particular, just albums of Barbara Cook's all the time. She would play through different songs from different musicals at the piano, and I would sort of play at her feet and listen while she was doing that. And we went to Broadway shows pretty often. Growing up in New Jersey, it was an easy 45-minute train ride into the city to see Broadway shows. So that was my first love. And then I got into accompanying musical theater as well. And actually I think the first encounter with the song we're about to talk about, I think I accompanied in a cabaret review, and we could talk a little more about that if you want. But I absolutely, like, as a I think 7 or 8-year-old, I would watch Guys and Dolls like every day. It was very strange. Like, that's what I was obsessed with as a very small child. And the Mary Martin Peter Pan too. My parents had recorded the TV broadcast on a VHS tape. And I even remember the commercials. Like, there was a commercial for Cadbury eggs that came on at some point, like at the end of that. And so I was rewatching that. I found that on YouTube, and I was watching that with a friend a few years ago. And like, I think the commercial came on, and I was like, wow, like, I'm 7 years old again.
So in your mind, the track list should include the commercial.
Yes, maybe.
It's funny.
Probably.
It's funny when we watch recordings of things like that, how whatever happens to be in there at the time becomes part of it in our heads too. And commercials, I hadn't thought about commercials, but there's another source of melodies for us to look at in the future. Can you remember the first time or a very early time that you were really affected by a particular melody?
I mean, I think it would probably be something from Guys and Dolls or Peter Pan. I think those were certainly the first musicals that I was affected by. And then I grew up too with Disney musicals as well. So I had my little colorful, like, tiny boombox, like, cassette player that I play. Like, I had a cassette tape of the Aladdin soundtrack, and I would listen to that all the time. And so I don't think I can pinpoint exactly what the first melody was, but I know there were a lot constantly. Like, I was just surrounded by all of these melodies in my house.
Well, and as kids, we are in a media diet of catchy tunes and jingles and songs and title themes for TV shows and cartoons and all those things made more and more catchy so that the kids remember them and sing them and that sort of stuff. When you started composing, you compose absolutely beautiful work. I was re-listening to a number of your pieces, and the melodies and the motifs that you use, and also in this case, we're talking about a song today. Your choral work, the melodies that you create are very spoken. A lot of what to me is important about a song is that the words and the notes sound like they go together. When somebody is saying something in a particular language, there's a certain rhythm and there's a certain meter to them and there's a certain emphasis on certain words. And you do that brilliantly. I'm curious if that's something you intentionally do. Tell us about your thought process of creating melodies and especially putting them to words, or putting words in this case. You usually do somebody living lyricist or living writer and put them to music. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's absolutely intentional. The sort of organic prosody of a text is, I think, the most important factor when you're setting words to music. I think the words are key. I think every element of the music can be derived from the words themselves, and that's always my goal as a composer. So I know I speak the words, I speak them aloud, and I read them. I read the poem, or maybe it's not a poem, maybe it's prose, but I read it in aloud and in my head over and over again until I have that prosody down, and until I could tell you every word stress. I know where the melody naturally rises and falls. I know where I want to race through the notes and where I want to slow down. That's all, I think, just of utmost importance to me, and probably should be of utmost importance to other composers, unless I think the text is telling you to purposely maybe draw out a certain syllable, or maybe the text is describing something confusing or something chaotic. And in that way, again, the text is still dictating what you might do as a composer, but the text is also giving you permission, I think, in those moments to explore and maybe even distort the natural prosody.
There may be times where the style of a particular singer or songwriter is to have the words not matching exactly what the rhythm and emphasis is. And I don't know if it's intentional or not. The songs, by Alanis Morissette, for example, there's a lot of times where her words just do not seem to land where you'd think they'd land conversationally, but it also comes across as a style and it comes across as something that stands out. But especially in a situation where you're talking about something in a musical, where somebody is singing words that tell a story and are expressing their emotions, and the audience needs to be able to understand them, having the words and the music be conversational like that is a really important thing. Previously on the podcast, we were talking about another melody that was very conversational, or very just spoken in the way that the notes and the rhythms came together. We noticed a lot about where words were in comparison to the downbeat, because the downbeat itself is going to be a point of emphasis when you say something. And if you start a phrase on the downbeat, then that phrase needs to be starting out as something you're saying. The first word is important. Or if you end it on a downbeat, the last word is important, or that sort of emphasis is important. And I know we'll be talking about that in today's melody, because there's some very interesting use of where the words land in today's melody. I want to point out, in your Breathe in Hope, there's a line that struck me as so perfectly phrased. It sounded exactly right. Notes, rhythm, and everything. And it's the one line that I can always just completely remember from that piece. And that is, "This is going to sound wrong. I hope this pain lasts." Because it's a piece about pain and grieving. And I understood that exact feeling that you said there, that you put to music there. And I understood not just the feeling of hoping that the pain lasted, like the idea that you don't want to let go of the pain because the reason you're hurting is important, but that's going to sound wrong, that you want it to keep going. And both of those two things in one single phrase, and the melody that you put there was just really beautifully crafted. And I want to just applaud you on the gems that you put into your music like that.
Thanks. That line was simultaneously the reason that I wanted to set that, in that case, a Facebook post to music. And also one of the most challenging, I think, one of the lines that I sat with the longest, because I wanted to do it justice, and I wanted I wanted it to be simple enough that it was completely understood by the audience. And then also I wanted that element of, I think, confusion or vulnerability to be in that line as well. That saying, this is going to sound wrong. Like I think it's hard. It's a hard emotion to set to music, even if the words themselves are very simple. And when you were talking about the reasons to possibly distort or move the words, maybe syncopate them or just have them stray from the organic speech patterns, I do think those moments of heightened emotion, especially anger, like if we're shouting at someone, we do kind of lose our, like, we're not going to shout in a really regimented, even pattern, right? It's going to be maybe like bursts of emotion, and maybe we're stuttering a little because we're not sure what we're trying to say, but we're trying to communicate it really forcefully. I think those moments, maybe it's not anger, maybe it is confusion, right? But those are the moments where our speech patterns do stray and do get a little off kilter.
Again, that particular spot, it's not just one emotion, but it's two. It's an emotion about emotion. It's thinking about the feelings and how you feel about the feelings, that was just a pivotal little moment, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I think looking at today's piece, or looking at today's melody, you'll see there are a number of little things that are conversational and sound just like that. The melody maker for today's melody was one of the masters of making words fit against rhythm and melody. And we will get back to that after a short break. Welcome back to the Melodology Podcast, celebrating the unsung excellence of melody makers. Dale, when I asked you if you would be on the podcast, you very quickly had one tune that you wanted to talk about, and you seemed very excited about this tune. What we're going to be listening to and looking at is Losing My Mind by Stephen Sondheim from his musical Follies. Dale, tell us why this particular melody means so much to you.
Part of it's just that this melody gets stuck in my head so often, and I think it's because it describes the sort of mundane little tasks that we do, right? It's about a relationship. It's about wondering about a relationship. Like you were saying before, feeling the emotions and then thinking about feeling the emotions. But I know this song it sort of, like it or not, it pops into my own head when I'm feeling moments of either extreme anxiety or just anything like where my mental health is not quite where it should be. And it's kind of funny in a way. I think there's sort of a bitter self-awareness in this tune, and we'll talk about that a little more, I think, when we talk about the melody and how that presents itself in the music. But it actually, it almost like helps ground me in a way to sort of sing this to myself. And like I said before, the first time that I really fell in love with this song, I don't know if it was the first time I heard it. I'd probably heard my mom play Barbara Cook singing it, but I accompanied a musical theater review as a high schooler that was put on by some members of the church that I was part of at the time. And I think it was a fundraiser for something that benefited a mental health resource of some kind. And the songs were all about the feeling of losing your mind.
Interesting.
Like just feeling unstable, which it's kind of funny when I look back at the songs that were chosen, but at the same time,
it's kind of awkward, the being in a situation about mental health, talking about losing your mind.
Yes. But at the same time, as someone who struggles with anxiety for sure, and like has had moments of depression in my own life, I do think, well, this cabaret is sort of a funny way to go about, dealing with those subjects and addressing them. Those songs all are, again, in this funny self-referential way, they are kind of touchstone like moments for me to rely on in my own life. So yeah, I'm very fond of this song. And I had a friend in college named Judith Ingber, who's a really talented singer and actress. And we would play through, just for fun, we would play through some of the really, like, not campy, but the torch songs, this and others. And, she could do them brilliantly, but then we'd have moments where we were both just like hamming it up and yeah. So I just, this song, I think, like, throughout my whole life, this song, like, starting, I don't know how young I was, whether I was 10 or I was 17 playing piano, but it's just been there for me.
Almost anything by Sondheim is going to be an easy tune to have stuck in your head, because the way he writes songs, or at least one way he writes songs, is he'll take a motif, just a few notes, and repeat that pattern with different words. The pattern goes through the whole melody. And he uses that in a way that makes it catchy. And amazingly, he does it in a way that doesn't come across as being repetitive and annoying. And I always find that amazing in his musicals. Like Into the Woods, they say Into the Woods and sing that motif so many times that you'd think you would just want to pull your hair out by the time you've gotten to the end of that musical. But it works its way. The meaning is different in different spots, and the emotion behind each scene is different. And I think in that case, it's probably also intended to be just a little bit insidious, because he was, I think, probably poking a little bit of fun at the Disney musical world and like all the way that fairy tales have been presented. But he manages to do this with melodies in a way that does not come across as repetitive. And that's something that we'll definitely be able to see in this piece. Let's go ahead and start looking at the notes and listening to this piece, and we can start talking about it. So we're going to just walk along the melody a little bit at a time. Unlike in other situations, this time I am going to have chords behind it, because the chords really do make a difference as the repeats happen, the different sequences of the motif. And it lets you understand kind of more where the notes are landing in the chords. Let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and play through the first real sentence in the song. And then we'll just go back and just look at the very first part of it. What do you notice about just the very first phrase?
I think there's the most basic text painting example, right? Like when I used to teach even like my little piano students about text painting, I tried to get all of my piano students to compose back when I was teaching piano. And I would say, well, like the running up a hill example, right? Or like running down a hill, how would you set that? And they'd be like, well, maybe the melody goes up and maybe the melody goes down. And so we have the sun coming up, which of course, I think I know as a composer, sometimes the very first line, you'll do a certain gesture, and then maybe it makes sense to use that gesture again later for different words, but we're stuck with, in this case, the sun coming up. And if we cheat and look ahead to the second verse, the morning is ending, but we still have that gesture going up, but the words are linked, right? They're both talking about time. They're both talking about the morning. And so it makes sense to have the same gesture for both. But I can absolutely imagine Sondheim writing the sun comes up and then using it again for the morning ending and for every other time this melody happens. Maybe, I'm speculating here, but maybe that's partially related to how appropriate it is to have the sun coming up.
And we have this pattern of nothing on the first beat, almost a syncopated phrase, da 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 da, the sun comes up. Nothing is on the downbeat. Nothing is being emphasized in this part of it. That pattern of notes, short, long, one, da, 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 that repeating, that's basically the motif of the whole piece, I believe. As far as word painting, you just reminded me the most, to me, obvious example of word painting with things going up and things going down is sunrise, sunset from Fiddler on the Roof. It's sunrise, sunset, going up and going down, which again, it paints with the words and it's just a step up in each of those, but it does the same thing. In the second measure, we've got that same pattern. So the first measure, we have the sun comes up, I think about in the second measure. And then you is on the downbeat.
Making it arguably the most important word and note that we've had thus far. If you want to make the argument, and this is, this isn't always true, but
this is where we're making the argument.
The downbeat is very important, right?
Yeah.
The downbeat is always very important. I know when I compose, I tend to change meter a lot so that I can preserve the integrity of the downbeat.
Clever.
Which I think some people are annoyed, maybe some performers, singers. But I do think, the downbeat is like, that's where you put your most significant, weighty words. And then we also have this low note that just kind of appears out of nowhere. So we're putting so much significance on you.
Yeah, I think it's very intentional that that's on the downbeat. I think it's, when you're looking at this melody, the only time you're hitting the downbeat for most of the piece, and we'll get into it, as we look along, we'll see that more. The only time you're landing on a downbeat is the focus of this whole idea of the losing your mind, thinking about somebody, is you. I'm thinking about you, thinking about you. I think it has to be intentional, but even if it's not, it's just how brilliant Stephen Sondheim was with just landing things with notes and rhythms, landing things in a meaningful way. And I have to think it was intentional, but it could have been one of those things that he just did instinctively.
That idea of saving something and not doing something until it matters is a really exciting compositional idea, right? This idea of we save the downbeat. We don't put anything on the downbeat until we put something really significant on the downbeat. You could imagine that happening with a chord too, like, right, saving a really important chord until, like, not having a root position, one chord or something. We would feel really unsatisfied. And then, but when it did happen, it would feel so satisfying. I just think that's something that we can steal as composers. We're not stealing, of course, a melody or a rhythm. We're stealing the idea that you can withhold until it really, really matters. And I also love how the repetition of the rhythm here is linking the sun is coming up and we're thinking about you, right? And they're the same in terms of the rhythm. Those gestures, those moments are the same.
That's brilliant.
And then we're about to see in the next phrase what happens next. The coffee cup, I think about you. And we're just linking, no matter what's happening, we're thinking about this love object, right?
Let's go ahead and play through that whole first phrase, and then I'm going to let it play into the second phrase of this first part of the melody. First thing I noticed right away is we've gone up.
Yeah, and why have we gone up? Because the emotion behind what we're saying is suddenly heightened, I think, right? Like we're talking about mundane, daily, recurring tasks. The sun comes up, we drink our coffee.
Right, and that's all in the same place, except you is dropped down. But this all of a sudden is going up because the lyrics here are, I want you so. So yeah, we're talking about you again. We're talking about the focus of the losing the mind feeling. And I hadn't even noticed that is in the words in the first verse again, where it's most important to have the words line up with the contour of the melody. Now it's just obvious. It's going higher up, so emotionally it's more intense. We're also continuing going up kind of the tonic chord a little bit. We've gone from the third of the chord. We've then jumped up to the fifth of the chord and all the way up to the tonic. Again, landing on the tonic up high. The main note of the scale that we're in, the key that we're in here, is A flat, and I want you so. So is on that high note in the scale, and so far the highest note of the piece.
Yeah, I think this is a crucial moment too, because we're establishing the nature of the relationship in the words. And so the melody does the same thing. That I think about you, we don't know why, like the implication would be, and if you were watching this in the context of the show, you would know that it's, I think about you because I want you. But if you were just coming cold to this song, you wouldn't know. And here's the moment. Why am I thinking about you? Because I want you so. It's not just that I want you, it's this unbearable wanting that drives the whole song. And so I think it makes sense to have this, the highest note we've heard so far is communicating the depth of this longing.
I hadn't noticed until you just said it, emphasizing the way you said it. I want you so. Even though it's not on a downbeat there, it's the highest note. It's its own emphasis. It's the main note of the key that we're in. I didn't even think about how you would say that until you just said it with that emphasis. Even with that pattern, that da 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 pattern, it completely fits the lyrics exactly the way, Sondheim does so perfectly so often. And then we have this last part, the last little bit of the melody, and I'll just play that measure for people to hear that who aren't watching the video. And the words there are, finally, it's like I'm losing my mind. And conversationally, me just saying that sounds the same rhythm. It's like I'm losing my mind. It doesn't land on the downbeat. It's not like, it's like I'm losing my mind here. It's just, it's like I'm losing my mind. And it's so perfect.
It's simple and it's effective. Yeah, and perfect. I'm so used to hearing interpretations of this too, where singers take a little bit more time on the words losing my mind. That it's like I'm losing my mind, right? It's the losing, like we pause a little bit as if the thought is just occurring to us. So it's almost funny for me to hear it's like I'm losing my mind without that little bit of rubato.
Kind of turning the last three notes before mind into almost a triplet and then mind on the downbeat.
Yeah, or putting it just a tiny bit before, maybe the piano accompaniment hits the downbeat just after they say mind. But yeah, I'm used to that moment existing out of time a little bit, and which is what we do. I think when a thought is just occurring to us, sometimes you can hear it probably as I talk on this podcast and every podcast, I hesitate a little bit and I say my thought, right? As we all do. Like I want you so it's like I'm losing my mind, right? Like you pause a little bit and then you blurt out the fact. And I just think that's all here in the melody. And then you put it in the hands or the voice of a performer, and it takes on even another dimension there.
And it hadn't occurred to me that this is really the first place, at the end of the verse, as it is, this is the first place that the title comes in. It's like I'm losing my mind. And it's the first time conversationally, it's almost like the person is just saying this and just realizing it at this moment in the song, or at this moment, perhaps in Follies. That hadn't occurred to me either, that they're starting to be concerned about their own sanity because they cannot stop thinking about this person. And they're just realizing it's like I'm going insane.
I think of this saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And this song is that. We're about to see I think about you, and then I'm losing my mind, I'm losing my mind. Those lines keep coming back, and it's as if the singer is maybe expecting something different to happen or expecting to get somewhere. These are the same gestures. I think very intentionally, the notes are the same for I think about you. I think about you.
And those rhythms.
They do not change. Yeah. And then where are we getting? We're getting nowhere. We're just feeling caught up in this like all consuming love or lust or longing that ultimately doesn't really go anywhere except to make us feel even more obsessed or like we're losing it.
Right. Well, and again, the melody, this is then repeated with a second verse, and you have the same pattern in the same place and the same emphasis on you. Everything they do, it's thinking about you. And again, it's like I'm losing my mind. that kind of, that repetitiveness. Hadn't even thought of the idea that you're just doing the same things, but everything you're doing is as if it's all focused on this person, this obsession. Really great insight. So then we get, I'm not going to go back and play it again, but that's repeated basically with the second verse. And then we move into a slightly different part that in a regular song form, this might be the chorus or might be the bridge. This is a little bit different in this one. So let's go ahead and listen to the middle part of this. Really different.
I think there's a self-awareness in the lyrics here. So far, we've just been saying what we do. The sun comes up, think about you, coffee cup. The morning ends, I think about you. I talk to friends and think about you. And then here, we're observing what we've just done. All afternoon doing every little chore, the thought of you stays bright. And it makes sense that we're shifting from the mode of just doing to being aware. Oh, the thought, like, it's not just that the thought of you is staying bright. It's that we're noticing that the thought of you is staying bright. And this is where the brilliance of the song really starts coming in, is that, again, like we were saying before, it's not just feeling the emotions, which we certainly get in musical theater. There's a lot of just like, here we are feeling our feelings and singing our feelings, and that's the song. But I think why I love this song so much is because of this moment, this shift into self-awareness. And there's this, it's almost like the melody itself gets a little like wry or sarcastic or bitter in the harmonies and in the way that the melody communicates that.
Yeah, and we've jumped to a minor key here. The chords really are setting the feeling as well, because we've gone from being in a major key to a minor key. So it's potentially more sad or more melancholy. And it shifts kind of similar ways that the chords shift in other places, but we're starting out kind of in a melancholy spot instead of possibly a happy thought, because we're not necessarily at the beginning of this thinking of you, as it were, until we get to that point where the next phrase, actually, it says the thought of you stays bright. I also noticed some word painting here, every little chore, all afternoon doing every little chore. It's just kind of like, it's word painting of little things, a whole bunch of little things squished together.
And it's, again, as we see throughout this entire song, but the prosody, the way you would speak, every little chore, you race through those little words, those little insignificant words. Yeah.
I'll play through that and then to the thought of you turns bright. So it's a little hard to hear with the chord there, but the melody goes, the thought of you stays bright. And it drops really far down, which I think is an interesting thing about word painting and the word bright, that it should drop so far. But it does also drop onto the main note of the chord that it lands on. And we've got a major chord lined up with, or it's a seventh chord, but lined up with that note. So again, some minor music, a little bit of diminished music, and then landing on the main note of a chord that's based on a major chord. I think that's an interesting thing happening there.
I think this is so significant, again, because we're making this observation. How do we feel about the fact that we are thinking about this person all the time? Well, we have a diminished chord, the thought of you, right? It's not the thought of you stays bright, right? It could be really cheerful. It could be really happy. Yay, we're thinking about you all the time. No, it's like the literal opposite of that in every way, melodically. You is like, it's not a happy note this time.
Right, it's not.
And then bright, instead of any sense of resolution or ascending to show brightness, text painting that way. No, we're going back down to the depths of probably too low for my range. This is my one complaint about the song, by the way, is that it's too low for me to sing it. Although it's early enough in the morning as we're recording, so maybe I'll try. But bright, to have that note be the polar opposite of what it could be. Yeah, stays bright.
Hey,
almost hit it. Yeah, again, just brilliance in terms of subverting expectations. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have the biggest leap here in the entire piece. We've dropped an octave. We've dropped the whole scale down. And everything else in this piece is, we have note by note that's just step motion. We have some small interval motions, but we have not had anything that was such a huge leap anywhere in the whole piece yet. The brightness isn't pleasant. Like that, the thought of you being there so much actually is not something that is always being enjoyable.
I think it's interesting too, not to make too much of this one note, but the fact that in a singer's range, this note cannot possibly be bright. It's going to be at the bottom, even like a really strong mezzo singing this. And of course it could be transposed, but I think no matter what singer, based on the overall range of this song, even if you transpose it, this is going to be near the bottom of a singer's range, and it's going to be darker and a little bit rough around the edges. It's not going to have that sheer brightness of putting the note up higher where you can really know. It's just everything about the way he's placed that one note shows us that the singer feels very resentful of the fact that they are in love in this particular way.
Well, this is also the same note, obviously in different chords, but it's the same note as you earlier in the piece. Every time the singer says you, it's that low note. But I think it can almost be, especially since it's low in the range, it can almost be like a sigh when it's not being performed loudly. But here's a spot where it's kind of the climactic moment, or one of the climactic moments of the melody, and it does the opposite of what you'd expect. It goes down into this kind of dark vocal range place. It's an interesting difference from what you would expect possibly, or what you might, think would be a, follow the rules kind of way of writing a melody. So I'm going to play that phrase again and let it go into the next phrase after. So we have a repeat of the same long set of rhythms, a 2-measure pattern of rhythms where it's got the same pattern and then the quick little notes. Sometimes I stand in the middle of the floor. And it's just brilliant that it's exactly the way you'd phrase it. Exactly the same sort of rhythms of spoken.
And then to have that be perfectly the same as all afternoon doing every little chore. They're so spot on. The wordsmithing, like combined with the melody, is again just perfection. And so intentional. And
Stephen Sondheim was just brilliant with putting words, especially in sort of a poetry form, of the same rhythm in a separate sentence, and coming up with exactly the words that fit there into that same pattern and sound so natural. So we've got that same repeated 2-measure pattern of sometimes I stand in the middle of the floor. And then we have a change in the next phrases. We have a different rhythm again. So we've got the same rhythm now happening kind of out of the blue. We've had these 2-measure patterns of all afternoon doing every little chore, and sometimes I stand in the middle of the floor. And even in between those, the thought of you stays bright. Those are completely different rhythms than we've had previously. But then we come back to the end of this section, and we're starting to slip back into the same pattern. Now we have the same exact pattern as the entire thing opens up with. And I think compositionally, this is brilliant because he could have done a different rhythm here and had it still sound conversational. But instead, he's taking us back to the original rhythm right before taking us back to the original melody, taking us back to that verse melody by bringing back the verse rhythms, I think.
Right. And why is it? It's because we're about to get stuck again doing the same action and expecting a different result. We're not going left, we're not going right. We're back in the language of the sun comes up, the coffee cup. We're stuck. We're stuck in the same rhythm, and the words are describing being stuck. And once again, it makes perfect sense. But also, I think it's interesting here that the notes are different for left and right, but the rhythm is the same because they communicate the same thing, even though we're describing two completely different directions. We're not going there. We're not going there. We're doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, that's, again, just so completely excellent. And the other thing I'm noticing here is even though we've got that rhythm again, we're repeating the pattern from the beginning of the chorus, I guess is what we'll call it. But we've got that 3 notes up and then a repeated note. And, all afternoon, the thought of you, sometimes I stand, that little 3 note and a repeat going up. And now he's using that 3 note and a repeat going up, but back in this stuck rhythm.
Which is the perfect way to transition from, right? If you establish something new for your new section of a new thought and a new emotion, and then you want to transition back, what do? You could combine the old rhythm with the new notes, with the new motive, and then it just makes, again, perfect sense. A tiny transitional gesture, but it's merging the thought we've just had with the thought we're about to have that recalls the first thought we had.
Which again is just brilliant craft here. Just absolutely amazing skill being shown in combining those things and making it flow from something that was different into something that, we're familiar with again. And then we're back into, everything being stuck. I don't need to play through it, but we've got I dim the lights, I think about you, spend sleepless nights, I think about you. And then we have a little bit of a change. So I'll play it so you can hear the same melody all the way up to the change. But when we get to that higher part, there's something that comes along that's slightly different. There's a change. We don't have the same little pattern jumping up and staying up. The words here are, you said you loved me. And in the music, in the sheet music or in the score, it's indicated that this is a spot to pause and to slow down in the music on me. You have you in the beginning landing on a downbeat, and now we have me landing on a downbeat, although as far as the length of the note, it's just kind of being hit, but then you hold it. But it's a complete change from the way it had worked before.
I think of this as, once again, we're having a thought about a thought. There's a self-awareness here. And this is the moment where I think the speaker realizes they're not going insane. They're not crazy to think that this person loves them because that person said they said they loved them. It makes perfect sense to be caught in this spiral of wondering, why am I so obsessed with you? Well, it's because you said you loved me. That's a big deal. It deserves another high note, right? It deserves to hit the high point of the phrase again. You said you loved me. It's kind of funny here too, with the rubato that most performers take. We kind of obscure the rhythm, and yes, me is on the downbeat, which again I think signifies the first moment of self-awareness, in that we're putting ourself first for the first time in the piece, right? But again, with that rubato, if it's you said you loved me, it's kind of hard to tell. Loved also gets a lot a lot of attention.
Yeah,
Like maybe there's a little
singers
fermata
tend to
there.
hit
Yes.
that because it's, you know, it's the high note, and it's really, you know, it seems like it's the emphasis. But I think it's actually listening to it in this context and listening to it in and looking at it. Also, it almost comes across like you said you loved me, but that's, to me, the music is saying you said you loved me, and I'm realizing, you know, but now you're loving somebody else, or you're not loving me. It kind of musically right there, just the notes and the way that you said you loved me, to me sends a message that kind of, it's like it's a lie, or is it true, or is it not true? And especially since we're landing on the seventh of the scale and we're not resolving back up, we're actually going into a chord. It's not resolving back up to the tonic. It's a note that's just kind of suspended there.
And that's a brilliant way to depict a musical question mark, right? This is all part of a question. You said you loved me, or were you just being kind? And I know as a composer, I wonder, whenever I hit a question mark, I wonder how do I show that in music? And usually it's the melody or it's the harmony, and it's something I want to destabilize that melody or that harmony. And so here, I think he could easily have gone, you said you loved me. We don't want to put the root of the chord on loved if we want me to be the most important note. We would want that to be, in fact, something different. But he does. He does put that, he puts the tonic on loved. And so it's kind of like a way to have both of those notes have equal but different weight, I think. Yes, loved is on the fourth beat, but by making it the highest note, by making it the tonic, there's so much weight there. And then me gets the downbeat, but the chord and the melody both destabilize that note and leave us like it's a big musical question mark, I think.
Yeah. So I'm going to play here where it's, you said you loved me, or were you just being kind? So again, we've got nothing landing on the downbeat. We're ending essentially on the sixth of the scale, going in sort of, at this point, if I was thinking about going directly to the end of the piece, we're kind of at a, you know, an amen sort of a spot, as if were you just being kind and it's done. But then again, the next little part, the lyrics are, or am I losing my mind?
I think in a different version of this song, again, we're on a completely different trajectory. I think maybe we could have ended with like, you said you loved me, right? That could have been the final thought. But then we have all these questions, these two questions come after. In the performance of this song, there's usually a big musical pause.
Right. Pause on after me.
Yeah, especially, and these words do come back in most performances, right? We get these words twice. And so, yeah, you said you loved me, or were you just being kind? Right? There's a pause, as if the thought is just occurring to us now, where we're, for the first time, we're putting our own interests first. You said you loved me. Like, I'm not being crazy here. I'm being rational. Or were you just being kind? And then we're doubting. And then we sink melodically and emotionally back into the depths of our own despair. Or am I losing my mind? And the melody goes back to where it's been sitting, and we're just feeling hopeless again.
Right. I do want to point out, we have the one step up, step back down, and then jump up. That's repeated all over the place. That's basically the motif of the piece. Da 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 da. And then that's repeated in this phrase, or were you just being kind? It's repeated without the rhythm. Or were you just, boom, or were you just being kind? There's no rhythm there. But it's that same pattern of step up, step down, leap.
I see that as rewriting the thought, again, completely rational thought that we just had. You said you loved me, and then we're revising it. Or were you just being kind? And we're writing over that thought with the same melody, but with self-doubt. And then we're sinking again. We sink even deeper at the end.
Yeah. And so the very last line of the whole piece, the very last phrase is, "Or am I losing my mind?" I'll play that. And again, as far as when people sing that, they do put some different rubato in that. It doesn't always land exactly on the downbeat. They sometimes wait a little bit after the chord to say mind. But I also want to point out, the chord there isn't just like it's going 5-1, but it's not just going a regular 5-1 chord progression. It has a flat 9. It has this really sharp dissonant note in it that, when you have half steps in a chord that are, it's basically an octave and a half step, that's a really dissonant sound. And it's dissonance can be associated with distress and emotions that are hard to deal with like that. So that's before you get to the resolution of the final chord of the piece. When you land on the tonic chord again, you have this really distressed chord there.
Yeah. I think too, I love, so in most performances, sometimes you hear the singer go down, and I'll try and sing it. And again, maybe it's early enough that I have this, but I probably don't, but they go, "Or am I losing my mind?" I do not have that note. It's a low E flat. I never have that
trying to go all the way down to the dominant below the tonic, like the 5 below. Well, it's better than going up at that point, because that would just be completely inappropriate as far as the feeling that's going there.
When I hear that version, I do think there's that, again, a self-awareness, almost like a sarcasm, maybe, to this last, "Or am I losing my mind?" Like it's this phrase is different, right? We've been saying it like, "I think about you, I'm caught in this spiral, am I losing my mind?" That happens at first. And then when we say it the last time, we have the knowledge of, "You said you loved me." We've had that realization. We can't unhave it. It's still there, I think, in the back of our mind. And to me, for some reason, that, like, when it does dip down to that low note and come back, it's just like the speaker doesn't believe it as much, but they're not sure. It feels like they're losing their mind. And even if they know they're not, they're still caught. They're trapped. Right. But we're trapped with perspective this time instead of just feeling trapped.
And compositionally, again, we have that little up down leap. So we have, "Or am I losing?" So "Or am I lose" is. So we've got that same motif that's throughout the whole piece in the very last phrase of the piece. That's basically a repeat of "Were you just?" "Or am I losing?" But again, here it's kind of like the pattern now. Saying that phrase is the pattern is now noticing I'm doing all these things and I'm losing my mind. Losing my mind and is part of the pattern, and recognizing the insanity potentially by having that phrase be repeated on losing my mind.
Yeah, it's so smart. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the chord structure too and what the chords are doing, but I think the fact that we can just look at the melody here and get all of this out of it just distills Sondheim's brilliance to like one little gem of a piece.
Yep. And I noticed, I didn't think about it at the time, but that same step up, step down leap is in every time It's Like I'm Losing My Mind, as well as in the ending here. He's using the motif with a slightly different rhythm to get through the words a little bit faster, but it's still there.
One more thing too, the last "Or am I losing my mind" contrasts with the first one. Musically, he's landing us. We finally have our tonic. We're stuck in it, but I think we're resigned to it. It's not a question anymore.
Yeah, every place else, "It's Like I'm Losing My Mind" is. So it's unresolved every place else.
And then this one, "Or am I losing my mind?" We're just completely in it. It might as well, the words might as well be "I'm losing my mind," or just I'm completely stuck on you. Like I'm completely obsessed with you. Yeah, again, I just think it's so smart to do all of that in this last statement, to have the awareness and have the, or am I losing my mind, be almost like a throwaway. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I am or not, because this is how it is. And we're back down in the depths of our despair again.
It's back down basically a third above the lowest note of the whole piece. So it's really low in the overall contour of the melody. It's interesting to me that the piece is in major, because you'd think that this spot of despair that you're in would be a minor sound. But I think you hit it where you're saying you're resolved to being there. The person has decided, I'm not getting out of this. This is where I am.
Right. Maybe there's nothing I can do about it, even if I am self-aware, which of course is not, this is the opposite of, like, when we talk about mental health issues, this is not what you want. You want to recognize, like, all of therapy is trying to recognize when you're stuck in a spiral, or when you're having a repetitive thought and getting yourself out of it and shifting something. But in this song, the singer must be getting something out of thinking about this person all the time, right? And I think that last phrase even reflects a little bit of that. Like, they want to be thinking. I mean, they do and they don't. It's not a choice, but they're not going to take any action right now. I know, like, in my own journey with anxiety, you revisit the same thoughts, and you sort of sink into the same depths a number of times before you take action. But I think there is something to that, and to the way that this melody is constructed, where it keeps returning to the same places and the same thoughts over and over again. I think there's really something to that obsessive nature, and the fact that we have to sometimes revisit the same dark emotion multiple times before we finally then are like, this is the time where now I'm going to change one thing so that the next time I'm here, I approach it slightly differently. And then eventually you get out and you make it to a different song with happier lyrics.
Hopefully.
Anything
else you'd like to say about the melody?
No, except I just, again, this is, I was going to say before, I think the moment where I'll be doing something, like I'll be washing the dishes or something, and then I'll turn to do another task, and then I'll start singing to myself. Sometimes I stand in the middle of the floor. Like, that's the moment where it comes in. When I'm literally standing in the middle of the floor, not going left, not going right. That moment, like, when I do this and when the song comes into my head, I also always think of something that the writer Elizabeth Gilbert once said on a podcast, how when she's feeling deep in grief or deep in sadness or despair, sometimes she'll go and she'll hop on one foot in the middle of the room. Like, she'll just hop on one foot, and she says, like, you can't possibly be as despairing when you're hopping on one foot. And I don't know why that moment, again, makes me think of this, but, like, it's I think it's my brain's attempt to make sense of, like, what do you do in those moments where you're standing and you're so despairing you can't move. And then we have Elizabeth Gilbert sweeping in with her little advice.
Not hopping left, not hopping right.
Not hopping right. But yeah, that is the one line. When this piece comes into my head, that is the one line that gets me every time in my own life.
Now you'll think of it as not hopping left, not hopping right.
Yes, now I will. Now it's ruined forever. Now.
All right. Well, let's take a break, and we will come back and talk more to Dale Trumbore. Welcome back to the Melodology podcast. I am here with my guest, Dale Trumbore, amazing composer. It was so much fun looking at that melody, Losing My Mind. It was so much of a deep dive this time. So I'm really happy you joined us. Tell me about the cues that you brought for us to listen to from your music today.
Yeah, so the first one is sort of my my take or my attempt at a art song in the style of musical theater, definitely influenced by Sondheim. And I picked it to share because I do think it has some DNA, maybe if not musically, at least in the kind of piece that it is, and the subject matter, the words. This particular art song is called The Philosopher. It sets a text by Edna St. Vincent Millay. And the words are, "And what are you that missing you, I should be kept awake as many nights as there are days with weeping for your sake." So it's the same emotion that we've seen in Losing My Mind. It's like, why am I in love with you when it's causing me great distress is the theme here. And we had seen, you and I both noticed in the Wikipedia article for Losing My Mind, it's mentioned that Losing My Mind is a pastiche of the Gershwin song, The Man I Love. And I just thought maybe we could touch on that very briefly.
Yeah, and The Man I Love, there's that same step up, step down pattern that's on the words, The Man I Love. It's built into the rest of the melody, but the words, The Man I Love, are, which we've just heard that same general motif repeated throughout an entire song, that Stephen Sondheim, he was inspired by that particular motif and created the entire piece, as a pastiche of that.
So this is my take, again, not in a very straightforward, I can't point to one section and say, oh, I'm quoting this, or this rhythm is this the same as this other piece. But this is definitely my take on if I were to write a torch song about that feeling of all-encompassing, stupid, irrational love that you should be able to get over, but you can't. That's what this is.
So let's go ahead and listen to a little bit of The Philosopher.
And what are you that missing you as many days as crawl? I should be listening to the wind and looking to the wall. I know a man that's a brave man, and 20 men as kind. And what are you that you should be the one man on my mind? And what are you?
This is a recording from 2011. I wrote it when I was still in college. I wrote it with that singer that I mentioned before, Judith Ingber, who, when we were bored, sometimes just play through musical theater songs we loved. I wrote it with her in mind, and then my friend Jillian Hollis and I ended up recording an album together, and Jillian ended up singing this song. And I love the line, "I know a man that's a braver man, and 20 men is kind, and what are you that you should be the one man on my mind?" I just think, I know I've been there in relationships, having crushes on people. Again, I wrote this in college, so I was still sort of in that, like, now I'm happily married and have been together with my partner for 10 years. So this is an emotion I haven't felt in a long time, but I think we've all been there, that feeling of like, why is it you? Like, why, of all the people, like, I can point out all of your flaws, but it's still you. So anyway, I really loved this poem, and that's why I chose to set it in the way that I did.
And we just listened to that off of your Bandcamp, so you can buy that track. Definitely go listen to the entire piece. It's a really beautiful piece. So you have another track. Tell us about this other track.
So this one is called Perhaps, and it sets a program note from a concert, which is a little strange in that the conductor, Brandon Elliott, who conducts Choral Arts Initiative, they ended up recording my first choral album called How to Go On. They're brilliant. I love working with them. I wanted to do something to honor their fifth season. And so this piece was a gift for Brandon, setting his own words that he did not anticipate would ever be set to music, but I thought they were really beautiful. And the reason that I want to share this in conversation with our discussion of Losing My Mind is this piece is talking about unanswered questions. And not having the answers, and how do we live with those moments when we don't have absolute certainty in our lives? How do we cope with that? And at the same time, I was looking at this text and I was wondering how to translate those questions into music. And that's something I know we talked about a little bit before. Like, how do you express a sort of musical question mark? Whether or not there's a question mark on the page, how do you express moments of doubt or uncertainty in music? So we can hear a little bit of how I approach that in both the melody and the chords in this piece.
Well, let's go ahead and listen to that. So beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you can hear, even just in that little clip, the moments of sort of either destabilizing the melody by shifting the chords underneath, or having the melody itself and the hesitations and the rests sometimes too. We can use moments of pause to express uncertainty, just as we do with speaking, all of which we talked about. So again, I think, going back to Losing My Mind, it makes so much sense, all the little tiny gestures that Sondheim does to express that uncertainty and questioning and doubt. There's so much to learn from that, I think, as a composer.
The setting is really beautiful with the chords and the way that you have the harmonies in there, and where there's doubt, you have some interesting dissonances in the harmonies. And I noticed, looking at the score, I tried to go full screen, but couldn't do full screen with it. But I noticed, looking at the score, that you do have places where you're changing the meter to get the words to fit into the phrasing the way that a normal sentence would be. Something would be spoken versus something that's poetry.
Yeah. And again, I think maybe that makes my music, sometimes it makes it look more daunting on the page, but hopefully makes it even more singable out loud.
It's a really amazing talent to me to be able to create a melody, to create something that fits the words so exactly and so nicely. And you could listen to the melody and the chords and understand the emotion that's in the words. If you don't understand the language, and this is why listening to music that's in different languages can still be very satisfying, because you understand the emotion that's being said there. But then when you have them in a language that you understand, and you hear the words, and they, sometimes your brain, I think, focuses on the words that are being said, and it lets those chords, those emotions slip inside your mind even more deeply, because your language center is listening to the message without necessarily paying attention to the underscore, like the film score that's going on in the background.
Yeah, I love that idea. And one reason too that I wanted to share perhaps on this podcast is because it's a rare piece where I wrote the melody first. And I had some of the chords in my mind, but I think I wrote the entire melody out without putting any of the chords down on paper, which is usually not how I operate. I usually go back and forth. I'll write a little bit of the harmonies out beyond where I have melody, and then I'll layer some melody on top of them. And I just go back and forth all the time. Not with this piece. This piece, I really wanted to capture that uncertainty and doubt in just the melody itself, and then use the chords to do exactly what you've just described, to do kind of the unconscious or subconscious emotional landscape that's kind of bubbling inside us when we hear words.
To me, you did a fantastic job of doing that with the melody itself. And then to me, I also focus on the chords so much. I will go back in and look at just the melody of that. It's interesting hearing about the way you compose things, and hearing when another composer talks about the way they create music, hearing similarities and hearing differences and things like that. Anything else you want to say about that piece?
No, I mean, other than I think it was really interesting and kind of exciting for me to just write the melody first and then try writing the chords. I think it's always worth switching up your workflow. If you're used to doing something a certain way, trying it a different way. And that was definitely an exercise in that for me.
So it was an intentional challenge that you set yourself to create the melody intentionally.
It became intentional. I think I started just writing the melody and then I just was like, okay, I'll keep going. And then suddenly I had the whole melody down. But then it was really rewarding to then go back and add the chords in and really just think about what's again that like sort of undertow of emotion pulling us one way or another, left or right.
What's up and coming for you? You've just had the honor of being included in a list of 22 composers and artists to watch in 2022 by the Washington Post. Congratulations for that. That's amazing. So what's upcoming for you?
So I have, at the time we're recording this, I have this coming weekend, I have a premiere with the LA Master Choral, which I'm really excited about. They're sort of my hometown chorus now, and I just love everything they do. I try to go to as many of their concerts as possible, so it's always an honor collaborating with them. And then one of my art songs that also exists in a version for chamber ensemble called The Gleam, which I wrote for Gillian Hollis, who's the first singer you heard on The Philosopher. That piece is going to be done with musicians of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in March, the chamber and vocal version. So I'm really excited about that.
That's excellent. Congratulations on those.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you for the amazing work you do, but also for your writing. Staying Composed is an amazing resource. Just like it said in the little preview that I read at the beginning of this podcast, it's a great resource. I have it basically stacked with The War of Art as far as a source of inspiration and ways to keep yourself moving forward and think about certain situations. And it's interesting that you go into more than just when you're stuck. You go into all sorts of different parts of the creative life and the creative experience. I can't recommend that book highly enough. So thank you for that. And thank you for the beautiful work that you do.
Thank you. And thank you for creating this podcast, which I obviously have been really excited to be a guest on, but I also am really excited to listen to all of the other episodes when they're out. I think this is just a great idea, and I'm so thrilled to have been on it.
So where can people find you online?
Mostly at daletrumbore.com. I'm increasingly becoming a social media recluse. I'm thinking about sort of transitioning out of social media and what that would look like. But I'm at Dale Trumbore on Twitter and Instagram. But mostly, if you want to just reach me and send me a note, the best place to do that is my website.
Yeah, I agree. Social media is a great place to feel like you're losing your mind.
It is. It absolutely is.
Thank you for joining us and listening to the Melodology podcast, where we are celebrating the unsung excellence of melody makers. We are at melodologypodcast.com and everywhere on social media as just Melody Podcast. Have a great day and thank you for joining us.